Hush-a-bye, my baby, slumber time is coming soon. Rest your head upon my breast while Mama hums a tune. The Sandman is calling when shadows are falling, while the soft breezes sigh as in days long gone by. Way down in Missouri where I heard this melody, when I was just a little baby on my mama's knee, the old folks were humming, the banjos were strumming, so sweet and low. Hush-a-bye, my baby, go to sleep on mama's knee. Journey back to these old hills in dreams again with me. It seems like your mama was there once again, and the old folks were strumming that same old refrain. Way down in Missouri where I heard this lullaby, when the stars were blinking and the moon was shining high, and I hear Mama calling as in days long ago, singing hush-a-bye. At the valley down below, it's green as far as I can see. As my memories return, oh how my heart does yearn for you and the days that used to be. High on the mountain, standing alone, wondering where the years of my life have flown. Thinking about the days that used to be. Well, I wonder if you ever think of me, or has time your memory, as I listen to the breeze whisper gently through the trees. I wonder if you ever think of me. High on the mountain, standing all alone, wondering where the years of my life have flown. High on the mountain, wind blowing free, thinking about the days that used to be. High on the mountain, standing alone, wondering where the years of my life have flown. High on the mountain, wind blowing free, wondering if you ever think of me. Come all ye fair and tender ladies, take a warning how you court your men. They're like the stars on a summer morning. They'll first appear and then loving story and then pretend they love you well, and away they'll go to court some other and leave you here in grief to dwell. If I had known before I courted, I never would have courted now. I'd locked my heart in a box of golden, never showed it to no one. Wish I was a little sparrow and I had wings and I could fly. I'd fly straightway to my false true lover, and all he asked I would deny. But I am not some little sparrow. I have no wings, nor can I fly. So sit me down in grief and sorrow. Try to pass my troubles by. All ye fair and tender ladies, take a warning how you court your men. They're like the stars on a summer morning. They'll first appear and then they're gone.
Far over the sea, there beneath the dark sky went a man for to die, for the world and for you and for me. Well, it bows down my heart and the teardrops that start when in memory that gray hill I see. It was there on his side Jesus suffered, yes he died, for the world and for low. They're nailing my Lord. sea. It was there on his side Jesus suffered, yes, he died for the world and for you and for me. Shout aloud, cries my soul, let the glad tidings roll from the hill to the ends of the sea. It was there on his side Jesus suffered, yes, he died to redeem a poor sinner like me.
lost his family and his home, left his children and his wife, 'cause he's chasing the winter's bone. Standing in their way, keeping their secrets from light of day.
May the Lord light your way when you step in paths of darkness. May He hold you in the palm of His hand. May He lead you to salvation when every hand's against you. May He blaze a path of glory to the promised land. Sometimes when I stumble and my face is in the wind, there is one rock on which I can rely. It is a rock of ages, standing strong, I know. When He's with me, He makes my spirit fly. May the Lord light your way when you step in paths of darkness. May He hold you in the palm of His hand. May He lead you to salvation when every hand's against you. May He blaze a path of glory to the promised land. seems lost along the way. Call out the name of Jesus, soon you will be saved. 'Cause Jesus' name will bring the light of day. So may the Lord light your way. When you step in paths of darkness, may He hold you in the palm of His hand. May He lead you to salvation when every hand's against you. May He blaze a path of glory to the promised land. May He blaze.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Hold on one second. Before I unmute everybody, a couple of quick housekeeping items. The final exam is now uploaded onto D2L. It will be active pretty much immediately after class is over. I'm giving you guys until noon on the 9th to complete the final exam. That's the Saturday before my grades are due on Monday morning at 8 a.m. So that is literally as late as I can push it. If you're able to get it done earlier, it will be very helpful. The project or paper is still going to be due on absolutely no later than noon on the 7th. Again, the earlier you can get those things to me, I've got 70 of those things to read and watch. It's going to take me some time. So I'd appreciate it if whenever those things are done, you get them to me, as promptly as possible. Okay, now I'm going to unmute everybody and you can go back and mute yourselves if you want. Hold on one second, there's something bothering me. Yes, I'm that anal. Okay. Everyone is now unmuted. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you guys have any questions about anything before we get started on Winter's Bone?
Nope, you answered mine, so I'm
okay, good. All right. There will also, by the way, be an email going out sometime after class with some directions. The thing I did not mention is that the test online is 100 multiple choice questions. There will also be opportunities for extra credit, like on the midterm. But the deadline for that'll just be something, I'll send you some questions, you email me back answers if you want to. The deadline for that will also be noon on the 7th. So I, again, have time to read them. Okay, before we get too far into the movie itself, a little bit of introduction, as we normally do. So a week or so ago, in our sort of trip through American film history, we saw our first film directed by an African American. This week, we have now seen the first film that we have seen, and again, not the first film we have seen, directed by a woman. So one of the things I want to examine a little bit, and I'll ask you to examine in more detail in the study guides, which are also now up on D2L, is both the history and the current state of women in film. So I'm going to share. Everybody see it okay? So again, I'm going to have you guys, like every other study guide, you should go back and look through this and, read the things it says read and watch the things it says to watch. But I do want to just go over some of the quick highlights, and you guys can go back and get into the details. Some of you may be aware that in 2014, We won't get into the history of this, although it's a really interesting story. Sony Corporation had a massive invasive hack in which almost all of their internal correspondence was leaked online. And one of the things that happened there was that a lot of salaries were revealed. Jennifer Lawrence, the star of the movie we're talking about today, was looking at some of this correspondence and realized that in lots of movies she was in, including one she had just been in, even though her parts were pretty much equal to the male characters, she was getting paid less. And that if you look through a lot of this information, it sort of supported what had been suspected, and that was that women were systematically being paid less than men. Jennifer Lawrence went on to the internet and wrote a very brief essay, which I'll ask you guys to read later, called "Why Do I Make Less Than My Male Co-Stars?", in which she talks about the difficulty of women interacting in a male-dominated industry, how difficult it is to negotiate, both in terms of what women sort of feel like they need to do in a workplace and what men expect of women in a workplace. It's very short, it's very simple, but it's very interesting perspective. So I'll ask you guys to go in and take a look at that. There's also a great video by Naomi McDougall-Jones, who talks about, and this is something that is particularly important for those of you who want to get into production, and particularly important for those of you who are women and wish to get into production. And she talks about a lot of issues. She began as an actress and then went into being a producer and a director. And one of the things she mentions is that some of the inherent sexism that occurs in the motion picture industry begins at the script stage. And I having read hundreds of scripts, I can attest that this is the fact. You're more often than not, when you see a female character introduced in a script, they are going to, in some way, more than likely be sexualized. They're more likely to be described by their physical appearance and by their relationship to a man than they are to be described as a character. You can see on the screen here some of the things she has just pulled out of scripts that she was sent to audition for. Female, no dialogue. The character only needs to stand on a balcony, look forlorn, and walk back inside the house. Only partial nudity. Sarah is Brian's love interest, attractive, cute, and flirty. She is the ideal girl and Brian's prize throughout the entire film. Mom, a proper Southern belle who is making peace with the fact that her only purpose in life is to tend to her husband. And Abby must be okay with a tastefully shot gang rape along with performing 19th century dance. These are some of the descriptions of characters that she was asked to audition for. So I'll ask you to watch that, and I also think you'll find very interesting Colin Stokes talking about sort of the same perspective, but from the male perspective, and what movies that seem to emphasize male characters over female characters, what kind of messages that is teaching our boys. And what effect that's having on boys in society. So watch those things. They're very interesting. I think a lot of you are aware of this as well, but I just want to mention the Bechdel test. Now look, a lot of people react negatively to the idea of the Bechdel test, but it's not a test of whether or not a movie is good or whether or not a movie is bad. It's not a criteria about the quality or the worth of a film. Alison Bechdel, who came up with this test in a cartoon strip herself, says, my favorite movie doesn't pass this test either, but it is an indication of gender bias. And the idea here is that and I ask all of you to just go into your head, pick your favorite movie, your favorite couple of movies, and just in your head, see if this works, see if this passes muster. If you're looking at a movie, does that movie have at least two female characters who have names? Do those two female characters have a conversation with each other? And is that conversation about something other than a man? The number of films that don't pass this test is astonishing. You can see just from the chart here, it's about 50% of movies that don't pass that basic test. We know that almost every movie ever made has two men who have names and have a conversation with each other about something other than a woman. So, you know, it is an indication that there's an inherent, possibly an inherent gender bias in our storytelling. If there's an inherent gender bias in our storytelling, and, you know, we started off this semester talking about that what we were going to be considering is what movies say about us, what they say to us, and how they say it. If there is gender bias in that communication chain, then what are movies saying to us, and what are they saying about us? And this is stuff we can open up for conversation once I get through this in just a second. So there are a couple of videos about the Bechdel test you can kind of watch. Or actually watch, I don't know why is it kind of there. Gina Davis, the actress Gina Davis, has been sort of an advocate in terms of and she's set up her own institute, in fact, to try to sort of fight gender bias in Hollywood productions and in television. And she made just the recommendation that, you know, maybe if you're a script writer or you're a producer and you're dealing with a script, and you go in there and you just take some of the characters who are male and you change their names to female and make them female, maybe that would help. Maybe if just describing a crowd scene, that you make sure it's described as being 50% women, since most crowds in this world would be, in fact, 50% women. So, you know, just some things that if you're familiar with the movies and you're familiar with scripts, you realize these things are just endemic in scripts. The idea that there are more men than women, that the male characters are basically more important than the female characters, and that it is essentially a male world that is depicted to us in our motion pictures. This is partially, you know, we have to admit this is partially probably because of what's going on behind the camera. From the years 2007 to 2019, the percentage of about 1,300 movies that were made during that time, that's not every movie, but that's a good cross-section. Only 4.8% of those movies were directed by women. The ratio there is 20 male directors to every one female director. I just let that sink in for a second. That is, again, 50% of our population. The people who are telling us the stories are largely male. However, go into something like Metacritic, you know, where the critics basically rate movies and try to determine whether or not audiences and critics like male-directed movies better than female-directed movies, and they don't. It's about equal. Female-directed movies often make a lot of money too. So there's no financial motivation for this. There's no critical motivation for this. This is just something that's endemic in the system. If we talk about underrepresented directors, if we talk about women and men of color and women of color, we're looking at only about 13.5% of all movies that are made. That means the rest of that is all white guys telling us the stories that sort of influence our culture. And once again, there's really no difference in the way in which those movies make money and the way in which those movies are critically accepted or popularly accepted. And again, I'll have you guys can go back and look at some of these in more detail. We can look across the board here. We can see that in this swath, this sort of swash of movies, 82.5% are directed by white males, 3.9% by white females, 12.6% by underrepresented males, and less than 1% by underrepresented females. You'll see some of these numbers kind of float slightly around depending on what the selection of movies they're drawing from, but they stay relatively consistent. The other thing is the movement of women, and this is something we'll talk about when we talk about Deborah Granick, who directed Winter's Bone, the movement of women filmmakers through the industry. If we look at the Sundance Film Festival, for example, we can see that On the average, 34.5% of movies in Sundance are directed by women. It's certainly a higher percentage than we see overall in the industry. It's still low. By the time we move into episodic TV, it goes down to 31%. By the time we move into Netflix movies, it moves down to 20%. By the time we move into the top grossing 100 films, it drops back down to that 4.8% again. So not only are women underrepresented, they're also obviously hitting hurdles and barriers as they try to move through the industry. So, one of the things that we can notice is that it's better now. It's better in the last couple of years than it had been. But it seems to be really easy for a white guy to make a fairly well accepted, low budget, independent picture, and then move almost immediately into doing big budget tentpole pictures. Colin Trevorrow, David F. Sandberg, there's any number of them. It seems to be a little bit harder for women. Now, there are other things that factor into that, and when we talk about Deborah Granick, we'll talk about that in a little more detail. In the awards, the major awards, we're looking at the Golden Globes, and maybe this is representative of how few movies are being directed by women. That certainly plays into this as well. 4.5% of directors that win the Golden Globes are women, 4.9 the DGA Awards, 3.2 the Academy Awards, 7.1 Critics' Choice Awards. So, I won't hammer this home much anymore, but we are looking at a massive underrepresentation of what is 50% of our population, or actually a little more. Of the top 100 grossing films from last year, of the top 100, only 12 of them were directed by women. Last year, when production companies like the major studios or larger production companies put out their, announce their slate, in other words, they say, this is what we're going to release to the public in 2019, or 2015 or 2016, whatever it is. Out of 40 different slates, only 26 of them, out of 40 slates from 8 companies over that period of time, only 26 of them did not include a single underrepresented woman director. So we've got women, we've got underrepresented men, we've got underrepresented women, where we have a massive storytelling industry that is telling us stories from a very, very limited perspective. And there's lots more information, if you want to see how some of this breaks down. But the other thing I want to do before we open the conversation is just talk a little bit about the history of this, because I think the history is rather interesting and rather surprising. And I won't go into this in detail, but one of the things that we know is that this industry was much more open to women in positions of authority and responsibility during the early days and during the silent era than it was after it became sort of industrialized, after it became consolidated, after it became more of a financial business than once it went into sound. And we've talked about some of the reasons for that. But, among everything else, and this statistic is a little questionable, but it comes from a very reliable source. About half of all the movies made before 1925 that had scripts that were written by women. We certainly can't say that today. There were women directors, there were women producers. I'm not saying it was an enormous, we tend to think of, older periods of time, women being less represented than they are now. And the only point of this is there was a time in this industry when women were still underrepresented, but more represented than they are now. There are a handful, there's some videos here, and if we run out of time today, we can come back and look at a couple of these together. But again, part of your homework is to watch some of these videos. there are a handful of women during this period that are worth noting and that you should know. You know, in March of 1895, when the Lumiere brothers had that first public projection of motion pictures in Paris, the train pulling into a station kind of thing, people exiting the factory, that kind of thing. We're pretty sure Georges Méliès was there, and that's where the whole spark of wanting to work with motion pictures and make motion pictures came. But someone else that we're pretty sure was there was a woman by the name of Elise. I always pronounce this slightly wrong. Elise Guy Blanchet. And Elise Guy Blanchet also sort of was bitten by the magic of the motion pictures. She went on to become the first female director, one of the first directors ever. Along with her husband, founded her own studio. This is a woman who, to some extent, has been sort of forgotten by film history. There's a new documentary out called Be Natural, which I'm pretty sure is on Canopy. So if you're interested in this period of time, we got a documentary here that talks about what were the first filmmakers to make a narrative film, the first woman to direct a movie. This is a woman who experimented with interracial casting. She was the first woman to head or co-head a movie studio. She's probably the first director to make a movie with an all African-American cast. This is all stuff we just don't expect, I think, from this period of time. She helped train a woman by the name of Lois Weber. And again, there's some examples of Lois Weber's work down here. The other thing about women during this period of time is they were making movies that were extremely socially conscious, dealing with subjects that we wouldn't think movies from this period might deal with. And certainly that movies, once the production code comes into effect, could not deal with. Abortion, capital punishment, birth control, the battle of the genders. So Lois Weber comes in a little bit later. She starts working around 1908. She works till around 1934. She is the leading female director-screenwriter in this early period, once the motion pictures kind of move to Hollywood. She's the first woman to direct a feature-length film. Again, she owned her own studio. In 1916, she was Universal Studios' highest paid director, and Universal Studios was a major studio during this period of time. And again, she made about 400 films, we think. It might be 200, it might be 400, we really don't know. Only about 20 of them are still around. So even the bodies of work of these people, we've talked about the fact that about 20% overall of these movies from this period of time still exist. So we got a very small sort of sample of what she made, but the things that she made were really dealing with the social ills of the time. There's a wonderful movie called Suspense that I'll ask you guys to go back and watch. There's a little bit of an introduction here and then the movie itself. As you can see here, among some of the things that she kind of pioneered, Suspense is about a woman who's at home, her husband who's at work, and a sort of drifter who is breaking into her house. And there is, and the suspense you would suspect from the cross-cutting between these three events. And one of the things that Lois Weber does at one point is this astonishing sort of triptych here, where on the screen at the same time, with these simultaneous parallel actions, are the housewife, the husband, and the drifter. And you're seeing what they're doing all sort of simultaneously. Hitchcock said the more information you've got, the more suspense you can have. So, this, and even you can see some fairly astonishing angles. There's just a lot of really great filmmaking that's going on in some of this work that we have of Lois Weber. During about the same period of time, there's a woman by the name of Frances Marion, who is one of many, many women writing scripts during this period of time. She partners with Mary Pickford, who is probably the most popular actress of the time and a producer. Mary Pickford, her husband Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith all got together and formed United Artists so they could kind of produce their own pictures and control the content of their movies. Francis Marion wrote about 320